And this comes from a writer at NYU writing on mindfulness in the Muslim tradition. So if we can just take a quiet minute to read this and interpret it. And then again, I'll offer Sheikhu to offer thoughts from his perspective as we begin Ramadan. So Sheikhu, I'd ask, what this means to you, and also ask Sarah as an instructor and spiritual guide for us here to also dialogue with you to talk about how this works in our various faith traditions and what it means, particularly in the Muslim tradition, to be mindful.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Sheikhu N. First, I want to explain what Ramadan is about. Ramadan is a time of spiritual reflections, really a self-improvement, and Muslims are expected to put more effort into following the teaching of Islam. The fast starts from dawn and ends up at sunset. So it's a very great time for Muslims to concentrate on mindful eating and mindful behaving. And mindful exercise is very important in Islam too. So usually during Ramadan, most of the Muslims are in the mosque. And before the prayer time, they would choose a time of the day when they can be on a quiet place. They would choose a posture where they're very comfortable, beginning by focusing awareness of their natural breathing. All this is try progressively relaxing the muscles tension throughout the body. Close their eyes sometimes, or lower them. Start to relax the breathing. Feel the sense of state of heart and mind in this moment. All this is trying to settle their mind by bringing awareness to the natural. Relaxed breathing, simply feeling the life and energy that Allah, we call God, throughout your body. Feel a deep sense of gratitude and thanks Allah for giving them the time to breathe, the living, and the being at the time of their concentrating. This is one type of things that put the mindness into people to just know that Allah is always with them. Allah see them and Allah watch them. It's the main thing of the Ramadan. Okay, back to you, Bob.
Thank you, Sheku, so much for sharing that. I'm wondering, how do you experience the fasting as so not eating as a way of supporting you and drawing closer to the divine?
Because the Ramadan teach you how to appreciate a lot the time on when people wasn't able to eat. People didn't have. Some people want to appreciate how people gave you the strength to eat and live. Because some people live like Ramadan for all their lives. Some people don't get to eat, some people don't get to drink. And this is the time to suffer a little bit, to show that how you appreciate God, to let you do it in 11 months of the year. Of 11 months, you're able to drink and eat. For the 1 month, you're trying to suffer on your own just to get you closer to God by helping and doing good and giving away and sharing 1/4 a part of your wealth and giving it back to the community. So it don't matter who you give it to. You can give it to Muslim or whoever is in need. That's when they bring foods and bring anything up and bring it to the masjid at break of dawn, so they can give it for free and everybody get together and eat together.
So I hear a very strong, what we would call social justice component to Ramadan as part of coming closer to God.
Yes.
Yeah. And what is it like to break? Can you, for those that, because many people haven't experienced it before, what is it like to break the fast at the end of the day? Like, how do you experience that?
Okay. Breaking the fast, we just first, before you break it, it's a special prayer you do. Thanks God for giving you the opportunity to do it the whole day. And then people have to do it together. It's like a gathering. Some people decide to go to the mosque or the masjid and get together so they can pray together and eat together. So that's the time the whole community can meet together. So no matter what level of life is equality, everybody is the same, no differences. So everybody eat together, drink together, and pray together. So that's the time that the community can meet each other, and we invite whoever is in the community to come over by the masjid closer to their community so they can talk about things and education and how they can talk about the policies and about a lot of things they cannot talk during the rest of the year. This is the time to do that.
Great. Thank you so much. And Sylvia, do you have something you want to add here?
I have a small presentation to share with all you all.
Go ahead.
Bob, can you please share my slides?
Sure. Just 1 second.
So hello everyone. I would like to share some of the basic and our culture of Ramadan. So we start fasting from before the sunrise and to the sunset. So usually we follow the lunar calendar, and it depending on lunar calendar, it can be 29 days or 30 days. And after the Ramadan, we celebrate it with Eid. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of a table for family members. So this is the very typical table. So we just start with some dates, fruits, and cucumber, and also some fried things. So here's some more foods. So sometimes we have some salad, some biryani. So there's a picture of fish biryani. And in the bottom left picture, that's I would like to share that we just counted the person of our family and just prepared 2 or 3 pieces per head so that we will prevent the food waste. And there's a picture of halim in the middle, second line, that is made of lentil and meat. And last one is soup. Next slide, please. And here's a typical Bangladeshi iftar party. So I'll not say all these are healthy, but I would like to show you how our food can be presented. So next slide. So the middle picture is chickpeas. We cook chickpeas with some spices, and it's really healthy. And after having the whole day, like 17 to 18 hours Ramadan, when we eat this one, it really gives us a strength for the next day. And next slide, please. So here the picture is shown that before having the iftar meal, usually our all family members sit together in a table and make some dua, so that there's a belief that when we have, after the day-long fasting, if we pray to Allah, and it will be granted. And the gift of Ramadan is very special, and that's why people sit together, and if they have anything to pray for their betterment here and for the future, they pray to Allah. And it's a part of mindful eating, I would say here, because before having the food and whole day when we are fasting, so we feel that we are so innocent at that moment, and whole day we don't do anything bad, and we try to follow all the rules which is recommended by our religion, and we really maintain our all greed and every other bad ills from doing. And after iftar meal, there's a trend to do Taraweeh prayer, which is very common. And for COVID, it is limited in New York City and other places. So that's all from my part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It's in part because this group tends to be, we didn't actually get a chance to do this, to talk about food habits around Easter, but it's really wonderful to be able to learn more, a little bit more about Islam and Ramadan. We're going to move into to talking more about the history of sugar. But before I do so, I just want to give a chance, if there's anyone who has any particular burning questions around Ramadan, to kind of give a chance for any of the participants to engage with either Cheku or Sylvia.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So we talk about fasting for the 29 days or for the month. Exactly what's happening during the fasting period? That's what I want a little more clarification. What are you doing during those 12 or what hours that you're fasting throughout the day? What's your focus for that period?
Okay,
Cheku, go ahead.
Sylvia, you want to answer? Okay. Most of the time, you cannot drink, you cannot eat, you cannot anything that we say on the rules of regulation of Muslim, you cannot do, you're not supposed to do it. Like you gotta emphasize it. Like you cannot curse. You have to always help because every do is granted more than it have ever been done. So for Muslim, during this Ramadan, they think already that the devil is chained. So anything you do is on your mind. So you're doing on your own. So any other time, they might think that things you do is always bad. Things you do bad are led by the devil. So right now you're on your control of yourself. So you're trying to do better than you used to do before because everything is granted more. If it was granted for one, it would be granted for 10 or 100. So you're trying to help the most you can. You're trying to share whatever you have. You try not to drink at all. It's no drinking, no eating, but respect all the prayers on time, the 5 prayers a day, on time. You know, during others time, they would tolerate maybe you can pray after, catch up later. But during the Ramadan, they want you to be available on the prayer time, the 5-time prayer time, you should be available to do it. That's mostly what you gotta do.
So you do this 30 days straight in a row, or you do every day for 30 days?
Yes, every day for 30 days.
Suppose you make a mistake and do something you're not supposed to do. So how do you rectify that?
Okay, if you do it on purpose, you have to pay 30 days, or you have to fast again 30 days straight up after the 29 days, after the 30 days you do. If it's by mistake, God tolerated it. You don't need to replace it. You can just keep on going. If it's by mistake, example, you by mistake, you forgot and you drink a little bit of water, you can keep on going, doing your fast during the day. But if it happened that you're sick, you cannot do it, after the end of the Ramadan, you can fast again extra days just to repair the day you lost.
Oh,
Right. Example, women during their period time, they cannot fast. So all those 4 days or 5 days on their period time, they cannot fast. So they gotta wait after and replace them like later on after the end of the Ramadan. Whenever they feel comfortable, they can pay back those 4 or 5 days they missed on the Ramadan. So
Interesting.
Here,
yes.
I would like to share with Shekhu that during pregnancy and illness, there is exemption.
Exactly. Yeah, and some people that exempt too. If you're sick or you have a life-threatening situation, you cannot fast. But it's a replacement. If you cannot fast and then you're sick for a reason, what they do, you can replace those days by giving away a meal worth. You can give away a meal every day, or you can give away, example, if it's like $5, a meal costs $5 or $8, or you can give $8 a day to anybody that's in need to replace those days you cannot fast. That's another way of replacing those people that cannot fast. If you have a note from the doctor say you cannot fast, then you can replace that by giving away money worth of a meal a day, every day for the 30 days.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There was one time many years ago when I was working in Morocco during, and it overlapped with Ramadan. And I was so struck how the extent to which it was a communal experience. And so that when people were breaking the fast, all the tables were laid out and they just sat at the tables in the squares and the big public plazas and waited for the sun to go down. And they all sat together until the moment when it was time to eat. And they all ate together. And there was something about that collective silence and that shared waiting for food. There was a sense of sacredness to that. That was very, very profound that myself as a non-Muslim could really feel. It was it showed me in a different way, another way in which food is sacred in our eating together, which we keep talking about in this course, is how we keep coming back to sharing food together, that really making those moments is sense of so thank you. Sylvia and Sheku for sharing some. And we wish you great faithfulness and sweetness these next during this lunar cycle. And this is a session in which we're transitioning some. We're transitioning from talking a lot about sort of some of the individual dimensions and talking about recipes and food. We're going to continue talking about recipes and food, but we're kind of broadening to the larger picture. And we're broadening to some of these bigger social, ecological, policy, community questions around mindful eating for the beloved community without losing the recipes and the food itself. So we're going to talk some about the history of sugar. It's going to lead in the history of sugar as an example and as a way of understanding that are leading to what we now call commercial determinants of health and other aspects of these big macro, beyond the individual dimensions that make mindful eating both difficult and critical. And so I'm going to be sharing some. I'm going to kind of give I don't have power. I'm not much of a PowerPoint person. So I'm not going to be doing a PowerPoint, but I'm going to kind of share some stories or kind of the macro history. And then Bob's going to pick up with some of the social determinants of health. And then we're going to open it for a wider conversation. We're going to have some pause moments in the midst of this for kind of deeper conversation. When we're talking about these histories, we're talking about historical trauma. And I really want to invite everyone, there might lean in or lean out, kind of, you can engage at whatever level feels right for you today. Either you don't have, if you feel like you need to kind of lean out a bit, that's totally fine. I just want to make sure people have permission around that. And I'm curious, like before I sort of talk, because I have something I want to share with you guys, but before I do so, I think many of you had a chance to read the article I wrote around the history of sugar. Its connections, very, very sharp and clear connections with the legacies of slavery. And I'm wondering if there's anyone who had anything in particular, just any stories or kind of initial reactions to that article that they wanted to share. And if not, it's totally fine. But I kind of just want to give a chance for if people had any initial reactions that they wanted to share, to kind of have a chance to do that before I start talking.
Yeah, I think I would like to say something. I read the article. I started out reading it and it was a little bit difficult. So I had to concentrate a bit before I noticed that you were actually doing the prior to when sugar was not a problem. And at the time when it became to be a real health concerns. And I think of all of the times I've looked at the different impacts that food has on us, and I look at sugar and I look at salt and I look at fat, this was probably the first time that I actually saw sugar as being so engaging in the slave trade. And that was a piece that was eye-opening. I don't know if I just had never quite focused on it, but it was eye-opening and clearly brought to mind a lot of what we continue to see as being folks who are still suffering from something that happened years ago, with sugar having been used primarily for wealth and income, and we would say greed, and the extent that one would go to just make money, and yet the people suffered. And so when I look today at some of the health challenges that we are confronted with, we can't help but think about that link and how deep and ugly it was that had such a strong impact on the health outcomes of so many people. And we are, as we speak today, still suffering from just the need to make money. Big companies and big businesses that are putting sugar in everything. So there's a whole lot of things that I'm sure you'll speak on, but that was the piece that was most disturbing to me. And I can't say that it was new, it was just disturbing. So
It's very disturbing. It's very disturbing. This is a very ugly history. Were there any other reflections at this moment? I was thinking about this question. Mine is, that I think in some ways is posed by the very title of this course, Mindful Eating for the Beloved Community. And what is this beloved community? And there's much that we can say about it. And as we go on, we're going to talk more about it. And we often link it to Martin Luther King and what he said and his ways of talking about the beloved community. And it's the way in which that has shaped the social justice and civil rights and beyond movements. King himself came from a lineage of Black intellectuals, theologians and scholars and ministers, among which were those who, in a generation before him, there was a collection of Black intellectuals who, in the midst of Jim Crow, were looking historically and contemporary, they're looking all over the world for how is it that they could change the United States and change what was happening here, which had so much violence. And the kingdom, the notion of the kingdom of heaven, which had been, of course, is a huge part of the Christian tradition, and to some extent the Judeo-Christian tradition, as a place where God's justice is here on earth, has long been a part of what we call the social gospel, which is a significant part of the church. It's not obviously the only part of the church, but it's one part of the Christian tradition, the social gospel, which essentially says that sin is not only individual, sin is also collective. It is insufficient to only save the individual human soul. You have to also, and this is, I'm saying this in the language of the Christian theology, you have to also save the relationships between men. You have to save the relationships and the institutional structures in which people operate, in which people are working. It's communities, not only individuals, through which the love and presence of Christ and the love and presence of God is known. During the turn of the century, the 1900s, people were looking for some different language other than the kingdom of heaven, and the beloved community ended up being one of the terms that they were passing around that would kind of reach an audience, the people in the United States who may or may not be Christian, or who were not necessarily resonating as much with that Christian language. So the beloved community became a term to talk about this way of living together that had justice in it. And so King's forebearers, including Benjamin Mays and Howard Thurman and Sue Bailey Thurman, men and women both, were looking globally, and they ended up leading to some very powerful international voyages and meetings, particularly between India and the United States, but also particularly West Africa and other parts of Africa. In all of these countries, India and Africa, the movements in the United States, were all seeking to decolonize their countries in some way, shape, or form. They were all seeking freedom. They were all seeking liberation from what we might now, from the colonial rule, what we might now also refer to as the white supremacy rule. And the kingdom of heaven, when these texts were written, is an idea that kind of led to the beloved community. The kingdom of heaven, when these texts were written, sugar didn't really exist. It was all honey, maybe other forms of sweetness, but other forms like fruit, but like you don't get a lot of comments in the Bible about sugar as we know sugar today, as in, white, refined, commercially grade sugar, because it didn't really exist back then. But early on in these conversations about the beloved community between India and Africa and America, in India, the term they used was ahimsa. Ahimsa means violence in Sanskrit, so ahimsa would be non-violence, and which is part of where our term of non-violence comes from. Was between these amazing conversations between particularly leaders like Howard Thurman and Mahatma Gandhi and others in India. And when I often think that would have been a fascinating period of time to be able to be a fly on the wall for some of those conversations. And they didn't necessarily talk about sugar per se, but there was a great understanding of the importance to live a nonviolent life, to move out of a system and culture of violence was something that you had to do for your whole consciousness, all of yourself, your whole being. It was not just about changing policies. It was something that the entire soul had to be engaged in. And there was a very profound understanding that's sometimes lost when we think about the civil rights movement, that this wasn't just about a different legal system, but this was about a different way of relating and being together. And I think, and my hope for some of this mindful eating for the beloved community is that we can take these notions of the beloved community to the next level, to the next stage, because what was started in all of these movements has not been finished. And much of the next stage has to do with these structures of oppression and these structures of violence that are on our street corners and all over the world. And that, I think, is, the sweetness that God talks about is that. It is that sense of justice. And the world that was created by the colonizer was a world that was not so sweet. That was a world that was deeply, deeply entrenched in violence. I think there's a couple of things about this history that I just want to mention. You can read, the article has a lot of detail in it. I'm not going to repeat what you've read. So one is that the Christopher Columbus, a couple of just pieces for you. Christopher Columbus, his mother's, so his wife's mother was a major participant in the slave trade in southern Spain. So by the time and he himself had been involved in the slave trade before becoming who is known for being in history. So by the time that Columbus left Spain and Portugal to travel across the ocean, he already had it in his head that whomever he met probably would be slaves of the people in Europe. Like that was already in his conception, right? So it wasn't like when he first met with the people in the islands in the Caribbean. It was the Taino people. When he first met the Taino people, his first letter home that night, and in his journal entry talks about them as some of the most gentle, beautiful, I think he might have even used words like godly, kind, generous, incredible. He was continually speaking of their generosity. And then his next sentence was, they will be easy to subdue. And they will be easy to turn into slaves. And by the time he left, he had brought some people back with him for the intention of turning them into slaves once they entered the European market system. The other thing he brought on his second trip was sugarcane. And they had already started experimenting with sugarcane. They started and they planted sugarcane. He himself, Columbus, was a bit of an idiot in many ways, as well as being incredibly racist and a generally horrific person. He himself didn't actually see the monetary possibility of sugar, but others did very quickly. And it was within a couple of decades that they essentially destroyed all of the old growth forests and all of the incredibly rich biodiversity of the islands and turned the entire place into sugarcane plantations, at first manned by the local indigenous populations and subsequently by men and women brought as slaves from Africa. Sugar plantations formed the shape of all other plantations. So tobacco and cotton came later, sugar came first, and it became the model for which all other plantations up and down the Americas were formed. And it also became a model for the first plantation, some of the first mass plantations. And as many of you know, mass plantations is another way describing that is monocropping. Like in today's terminology, we talk about monocropping, which is incredibly damaging for the soil. So they basically took some of the most ecologically diverse ecosystems in the world and they turned it into a monocrop. And they invited huge wealth from Europe to come out of that at the horrific expense and violence of millions upon millions of people. So it was bad for both the people and the environment. And it was, but obviously to say it was bad for human health feels like almost like an understatement. It's like that doesn't capture it. But the native populations, the Taino and many other indigenous populations throughout the Caribbean and subsequently in South America and Latin America and North America most of them would have been significantly healthier than their European counterparts at the same time. They had an incredibly biodiverse diet. They had an amazing diet. The Caribbean was known for its incredible, people were very strong and healthy. And today the people of the Caribbean are not known for being particularly healthy. It's sort of they're kind of in the middle of developing countries, quote unquote, also known as countries that have been stolen from. When we use frames like developing or underdeveloped countries, what's really being hidden in that framework is to say those are countries whose people and resources were stolen from, and they were forced into impoverishment. They were forced into poverty. Through which they're still suffering from in various ways. So this to kind of recognize that there is a tremendous level of both ecological and human loss of life at the same time. It impacted Europe. The way sugar came into Europe strongly, it probably fueled in many ways the Industrial Revolution. Sugar changed the entire eating habits of Europe. Europeans never ate sugar. As a whole, there's a little tiny bit of sugar for the upper classes. But there was very little sugar eaten in Europe, and then today one can hardly imagine Britain without tea and sugar and milk, and both tea and sugar coming through the process of colonization. And it has the process of the history of sugar is one in which very quickly the sugar lobby. So it's called big sugar. That's actually its official term. The sugar lobby. Big sugar comes to dominate the entirety of different countries' policies. It influences the British Parliament, it influences the US government, it influences the Caribbean, and eventually globally, because especially as the fight for abolition in the first Britain, the US became successful, sugar companies essentially just moved their plantations somewhere else. And they just forced into either after slavery, there was forced labor all throughout the world. So India, South Africa, the Southeast Asia, you have sugar plantations that are run on extremely cheap labor in essentially servitude. And you have the local politics were shaped by big sugar. And in slavery, both in the times of slavery and also globally in these other plantations, other sugar plantations, sometimes, not always, depends where you were, sometimes slaves were rewarded with sugar. So it's a very complex relationship because on the one hand, you're dying to create it. On the other hand, that's also a source of reward. So it becomes a very, in terms of the psyche, it becomes a very complicated dynamic to it. And that is, and in some ways, I think that actually, that became common throughout the world. There was a period of time, and it's actually more complicated now because there's been so much anti-sugar movement. There was a period of time in which what sugar you ate, there's whether it was very, very dark sugar or very, very white sugar, right? Because you have the whole gradation, right? So darker molasses being more refined, white sugar being the most refined, white sugar being the most dangerous for you from a purely health perspective. The darker the sugar, the slightly less dangerous. If you have diabetes, everything's bad. But sugar, there was a time in which there was a clear racial scale as well, in which white sugar was good and black sugar was bad. And that was mirrored into the racial dynamics as well, in terms of white people being seen as quote unquote better than black people, quote unquote. So there's just layers and layers and layers and layers in which racism is endemic and deep into the production and the eating, the consumption of sugar. These days, wealth is not about if you eat sugar. Wealth is actually more often clearly defined by people who don't eat sugar. It's how do you control the sugar? So if you control, the question is if you can control who eats what, then that determines elitism and wealth. So sugar has all food is social. Food is just, that's the nature of food, is social. We put things onto food. So there's a ways in which it's deeply, it has been used to consolidate and to reproduce a racist and elitist food system globally, all over the world. And it has obviously horrific health ramifications. Much of the kind of challenge, I guess, or part of what happened throughout this process, but particularly in the 1800s, so it's actually kind of after long, a bit after the abolition of slavery, is that you start big companies, particularly chocolate companies, Cadbury's, for example, start linking holidays with sugar. So the chocolate Easter egg, for example. Christmas becomes identified with candy canes. Easter eggs for Easter. Valentine's Day becomes associated with candy and chocolate. Valentine's Day itself was originally a man who wrote a letter signing it, your Saint Valentine, signing a letter from prison. There's nothing about, there is nothing about Valentine's Day that is remotely has anything to do with candy whatsoever historically. Mother's Day. So all of these special occasions become associated with particularly candy and chocolate, and that isn't done in part through, it's done through a lot of ways, but it's in part done through significant advertising and this would have been in the, so our first mass chocolate is produced in 1893. Cadbury's is producing their first Easter egg in 1923. So it's actually less than 100 years. So the association of like chocolate bunnies with Easter is, you know, like less than a century old. And today it's hard for many people to imagine Easter without chocolate bunnies. So I want to like really emphasize the extent to which people's taste has changed. And that therefore that the positive dynamic of that is that they can change again, right? It's like if we have come to associate holidays with sugar, mostly as a result of mass advertising. I think that there's some other psychological dynamics that were going on as well. And so, you know, and part of what happened is that like if you grew up in a family, you have all these early childhood memories where cakes are associated with birthdays and sweet things are associated with birthdays, and it becomes easy to perpetuate that. But it was sold to the mass public, including, you know, Black and brown populations throughout the United States. So those whose ancestors were producing sugar against their will have often in our times become those who the sugar companies are continuing to try to get to consume their sugar. And that, so that continues to be an exploitation of people for the means of profit. And what I'm trying to outline here is a deeply, deeply violent system that's violent to the earth, and it's violent to people's communities' capacity to be together and to organize and to have healthy, happy lives. Is violent to people, it's just violent to people on so many, you know, health, communities, societies, psychology, etc. I want to just pause as I can kind of go deeper into any of these points. But I want to just pause and just sort of see what kinds of thoughts might be sparking, or what kinds of, what might be sparking for people around these connections.
For me, it's rather interesting how you began to make certain connections. For example, people in Honduras, they are forced to produce tobacco, yet the people and the nation is starving because the industrialization of, you know, the many countries that comes into the Caribbean and Latin and South America. And, you know, as you're speaking, I'm beginning to see the picture and making the association as what is happening. In Central America, the most fertile land there is to produce and grow any kind of stuff. And so these countries are used to do the banana and the tobacco and all that. And they need to, the land needs to rest every 50 years. So as you're speaking, I'm making all those connections. You know, they take out all this substance out of the land, and so they leave the land to turn over for another so many years. But I'm from one of those countries where, you know, they've been there for 50 years doing the banana and all those plantations. No, those lands need to rest. So they're moving on to other places. And I see the industrialization and the colonization. I'm beginning to make sense and connection, and I would have never think about, you know, the sugar, and it makes sense as to what you're saying. We can connect to a lot of what you're saying, not understanding the background and the history. This is deep. This is very, very deep.
Sugar was first.
That's interesting.
Sugar was the first plant that like kind of, it led the way for the plantation systems in the Americas. It was in some ways the first plant, the first crop really plant. They would refer to it as king sugar because of the way it dominated people's lives. And much of what they learned by much of what white plantation owners learned in planting sugar through forced slave labor became the model for other slave plantations, just in terms of how things were done, like just the layout of the plantation, who was going to do what, where, how are they going to force people to do labor they didn't want to do. Like all of sugar was first.
Yeah, the
And-
Carolina rice is one of the concepts that I learned in seminary.
Mm,
Okay, where
Big
rice came from and how they brought it here and
mhm.
how they're exploited. And so that was the first concept that I learned, was the rice and the Carolina rice, so it came to be. So I follow you.
Cane sugar grows very high and very fast. It's a grass. Cane sugar is a grass, right? And it grows 6 or 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, very, very tall. And if you don't cut the sugar immediately, once you cut the sugar, the sap begins to harden immediately. So from a production standpoint, you need to get the plant into a process of production, by which I mean you need to cut it and then you need to squeeze everything out of it, extract all the juices from it, and boil those juices down as fast as possible. And that's actually where a lot of the sense of speed that we have that became part of the Industrial Revolution comes from, that initial sugar plantation. The sense that you have to get it done fast. And so people worked around the clock. Slaves would work around the clock to get that sugar through the production line, which, you know, you can produce sugar on smaller, like smallholder farms without that. It's not as horrific because it's all done in small production. But if you do it on a mass scale, which is what you need to do to make a big profit, then, or that's the route that they chose, then the exploitation of people is almost inevitable because of the nature of the plant itself. So if your mass production of sugar almost always means the exploitation of people. And that's not true for all plants. It's not sugar per se. So like the sugar cane itself, if you just have like a bit of sugar cane, you chew it, you're not, you know, it's not so bad for you. It's what happens as it goes through the process of this industrial process.
And, you know, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking about that because I'm African American. I don't have a Caribbean background. And I remember as a child, the first time I tasted sugarcane, it wasn't attractive to me. You know, it's not like the sugar that we put in our cereal or tea or whatever. You know, the processing has made it like addictive. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think it's actually really important to distinguish that because it's not the fault of the plant, right? Like the plant is just a plant. It's just doing what it's just a grass. There's nothing wrong with the plant. Sugarcane, we can don't blame the sugar plant. It's the
I think that if we depended upon the plant itself, that we wouldn't be so addicted to sugar. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, if we had to boil it down or whatever to sweeten things, you know, we would be used to much less sweetness in our foods.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Absolutely. And it's the same thing with corn syrup, right? Corn itself, the plant of corn is slightly sweet. You can get some very sweet corn.
Oh yeah, I got some last year.
It's amazing.
I was eating it raw.
Right. And absolutely. I mean, I used to grow corn that was just some of the best. And you can just eat it right off the stalk. But it's the processing that makes it so horrific. And that's for corn syrup, right? To change corn into corn syrup being one of the particularly deadly form of sugar, of sucrose, then it's like that's part of it's how you process it. And so it's so powerful about this is that that's very much echoes one of the core tenets of the beloved community, which is the means, the ends do not justify the means. The ends do not justify the means. So if you're going to produce something that's so painful for the plant and for the people, then then it turns out it's also painful for your body. And it also kind of brings us back into that conversation, the importance of whole foods versus processed foods. Yeah. So other kinds of thoughts around some of this.
Yes, I guess I'm the only one that truly to understand, because mindful eating, I never seen cleaning and all this before. So I understand that, but the history part, I'm confused. I don't see the connection.
You have seen the connections between them?
Let me speak, please. The lady from before say it was very painful, the slavery and all of that. It's good to know about history, but mindful eating, we going forward with our society now, with everything going on in our nature. I think that was a very heavy subject tonight. I don't think the timing was very, very, very off. Personal, I think the timing was off. And personally, I think that was a topic for another time, not this time or more and what we're going through, all the COVID and everything else. I'm amazed, but there are people understand I don't. I'm very confused. It's not the time. Because like you say, people fighting, we having crisis going on right now. And tonight's subject, what's the time?
This is Toya Moore. I'm not on camera, but I have to agree. I just messaged a friend of mine saying that this is very good information. I find it very interesting because I didn't know a lot of it. However, I personally do not feel that it's culturally aware or that the delivery right now is particularly helpful, especially for Black people across the diaspora who are still living in the trauma of the systems that were created based off of some of the history that you're going over right now. So, you know, the information is great. I'm very interested, but I'm debating on if I should hang up and go in a corner and meditate, or if I should continue, because I feel like this has not been helpful for me today. And while the information is interesting, I think there's a lot more a direction that I was hoping that this course would have taken without this heavy subject, as Victoria, her camera says Victoria, I think it's Victoria. As Victoria said, this is not helpful to me. And I'm struggling with continuing on and maintaining my peace versus continuing on and continuing to feel I don't want to say traumatized. I feel like that's the $1 million word that people are using, but I'm feeling some kind of way right now.
I'm sorry you felt that way. That wasn't my point, because this is not what this is about. But I'm saying it's crisis. Let me clarify this. The time that we going through of 20 to 21, it was a lot for us. But the subject was, it's good to be educated, but most of us know our history. We do. Talking about slavery and all of this, ain't gonna never be a good time. But now, and I don't want you to go in your corner and anything, this is what the perfect is to discuss. But that was I wasn't expecting this kind of subject tonight with Mindful Free. Our last week was great, but I don't want to criticize her, but this is not the time.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, Ms. Victoria. It's not a criticism. It's just saying that it just doesn't sit well with me. I can only speak for myself.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't really bring that point out, because right now, like she said about the fighting,
I think she's
watching these.
I don't think she's speaking
to you. Your point was very good. We know about sugar. We know about this. We know about white sugar this and black sugar this. But sometimes it's just hard. And I'm trying not to take this personal, but tonight wasn't the time. That's what I'm saying. It wasn't the time. We need things. Last week I thought it was perfect. We need something to uplift our spirit at times when we going through with. But this is just my point. But what your subject was great. But I think most of us now know about our history and know all of this, and that opened up a lot for us in general. I'm speaking of us. It opened up a lot. I come to the time that I'm going forward. I'm going forward because the history in the past make us better people. I'm a different generation. It makes us better people. Ignorance is a blip. I know history, but I never was the one want to repeat things. I want to build on it. Somebody else can help me out here a little.
Well, I mean, I can appreciate, what you're saying. Sometimes we need to understand where we are coming from to understand where we are going, or how did we get here?
And I think that we know that. We definitely know how we get here. We definitely know. Like I say, but I'm saying when you go back, it's like you learn to accept, and I always believe you build on it. When I say build on it, you make it better. Those people back there, they didn't know no different. You can't bring that thing that's gonna happen today. We know about sugar. I always eat healthy. I know about eating healthy. These are our choices. I take no medication, but we have to educate ourselves. But when you tell me about other people and what they built, we know what was taken for us. We know it's like, we don't want to go there because a lot is going to hurt. I guess the subject, like, I think I'm going to close up and come out because this is not a good subject. We know our history. I know about Cain. I don't know about no Jamaican and all that. But yes, go ahead, Sharon.
Can I say something? This is Sharon Simmons. She's trying to touch on historical systemic racism, the origin of systemic racism. This is not trying to offend anybody. She's trying to give us a little history about for profit over humanity. This is what
Sharon, not cutting you off. Don't you think we know this? Don't you think we know this?
It's not about everybody doesn't know the history.
And then I apologize.
Know the history, but she's trying to get to the point why these things happened, why people were put in bondage. Profit over humanity. This is what this is all about, and it's present till this day.
Thank you. Still going on now.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. That's my point.
That's why the Hispanic community have so many health disparities. If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Right.
Sharon, we do know our history. Okay.
Everybody doesn't know the history.
Victoria,
you know
could I interject? This is Lisa speaking.
Their history.
Hello?
Everybody doesn't know.
Hello,
I think I also
could I
want to say
interject?
something. This is Reverend Felicia from Word of Life.
Please.
Maybe we can take turns. Is there a way that we can identify one?
The only thing I'm saying, and I say it again, I didn't think tonight was the best time for this subject. It wasn't. That's all I'm saying, and I'm going to believe that. Because what we just come from 2020 to 2021, it wasn't a pretty picture. It wasn't. Everybody maybe I agree don't know history, but I think most everybody, and we are not no young people, know history. It's how we define history. What she say, I didn't say she was wrong. I said the timing was off.
Well, no matter what,
And I want, we can agree or disagree. I understand that. It's okay. I'm good with that. But I'm just saying I didn't thought the time was good.
And
I'd like to interject. I understand where you're coming from, and particularly in the last few weeks, this whole issue of systemic racism is a very touchy, triggering subject. However, I just want to say that I did not know specifically the history of refined sugar in the last 100 years. I know the history of enslavement on, the Caribbean islands, particularly when it comes to sugar cane and, things like that. But I didn't know the corporate nature of sugar and how it has been used to addict people of color, not just people of color, but everyone. It's a corporate thing to make money. And I didn't realize that all of this happened within the last 100 years, because I was born like in the 1950s, and sugar wasn't a big, huge thing in my early childhood. We had oatmeal and stuff like that, and you might throw a teaspoon of sugar in a bowl, and that was it. But over the years, as I grew older, you started seeing things like Lucky Charms come out, and all of those sweet, ultra sweet sugars, and the sodas, and the dependency on all of this. And so I think we're learning about more recent history, and corporate systems is very important for us to learn about, because we have to be able to speak from knowledge. It's not enough to say, well, we're just talking about enslavement. We're talking about a new kind of enslavement. It's a new kind of enslavement.
I understand
Mhm.
that. And by sugar and all this, when you shop, be mindful. I always did that. I never did red sharp. I sweet stuff. I don't even like sweet. I'm not saying it, but I know what she's saying. I'm not saying it's good to be reminded. But these things, I know a lot of, you could see a lot of people don't know history, but I think most of everybody know history. A little. You might know, you might a little curious about other culture.
Right. So I'm going to
like other culture. I'm okay. Go ahead, speak.
I'm going to raise my hand.
Yeah.
So,
Please do.
so first of all, Victoria and everyone, this is what a robust conversation looks and feels like. And so this is not negative by any means. The hotter the conversation, the stronger the metal that is formed. And so I just want to remind everyone again that this is a safe space for conversation. So there's no one should feel offended, and everyone should still feel like they should be able to have their opinion. So that's very, very important. I also want to recognize the fact that being one of the only chefs of color in the country that have been in spaces and places and understanding a very white systemic racist construct, we as Black and brown people have been beat up for hundreds and hundreds of years, and by no means can anyone try to downplay or underemphasize the amount of trauma and pain that we have been subjected to through all different types of system constructs within the food system, including sugar. You have to throw alcohol in it. You have to, we've been the victim over and over again. That all said, some people know a little bit, some people know more, some people know a lot, but at the end of the day, we are still all fragile from a traumatizing pattern generationally. I'm 4 generations out of basically slavery. Where I come from in North Carolina, there's white Askews and black Askews. It's an open and shut case. So I want to just recognize the fact that, as we talk and as we express ourselves, we want to leave space for healing, because it's really important to acknowledge you, Victoria, because I feel your pain. I feel your pain, and what we have been through the last year was just devastating, and that's not the only year that Black and brown people have taken the blunt of things in the cycle of these systems that basically we are preyed upon. And then lastly, I just want to talk about what systems change work feels like. It feels just like this. It doesn't feel good, because if it did feel good, it wouldn't be systems change work, because the system is welded. Pretty much, welded with nuts and bolts. so that it cannot be dismantled. And that's why these systems are still in place hundreds and hundreds of years later. So these discussions are sometimes going to hit a nerve, or if not, rip a scab off a wound.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. And I think it's, as a collective, it's up to all of us to also be able to help heal each other, because that is, I mean, pain is pain, you know, and it don't feel good, or they wouldn't call it pain. And so, you know, when we think about how we changing the system and just the well, the disgusting things, I mean, you know, I can't watch Roots. I mean, I haven't been able to watch Roots since I was 13 years old. I can't watch it. You know, I'm not a good, you know, I'm not a sound person the next day, you know? So, you know, these are things that, although they're highly sensitive, you know, in a lot of faith traditions, you know, we know things. We need to also never forget things, but we also need to know that the system is like artificial intelligence. We make a move, it's already making 2 other moves to outmarket and get to our next generation, you know? And so how do we teach the next generation to look out for and pass down that history? So it causes the next generation less pain. It's still going to be, pain is pain, and we have to get to multiple generations maybe before some of that subsides. So, you know, I just want to be mindful to everyone. This was actually one of the best conversations, to be honest with you. You know, that everyone really dug in and really and especially to you, Victoria, showing your vulnerability about how you feel about things. And that's at the root construct of systems change, because when we form a collective around that type of passion and those feelings that we don't want to hurt no more, that's when things get done. And there's really a true essence of creating sustainable systems change. Does that make sense?
Yes, but that
Yeah.
wasn't really my intention. I
No,
believe in
no
going
apologies
forward.
needed. No apologies needed. We're
Right,
gonna
thank
move
you,
forward.
thank you.
We're
Okay.
gonna move forward, and I like you kept it 100, right? Like we say.
Jeff, can I say one thing?
Yes, you
You
can.
know, this course is also talking about Bible scripture and leaning on the Bible and beloved. We are supposed to be God's beloved, and we're not supposed to focus on trauma and fear. I know it's there, but we must learn how to understand it and move on from it. You know, because I keep hearing about trauma and pain and what's going on now. What we have to keep, like you said, mindful. We have to keep up front the positive collective and try to go on in life and see what we can do to heal this earth. It's not about staying stuck in trauma and pain in the past. It's about learning so we can heal. You know, God says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And when you're fearfully and wonderfully made, all good things come from God. Okay, so all the negativity about talking about slavery in the past and stuff, that's supposed to be as a learning experience. It's not supposed to be as a traumatizing experience. That's how I see it.
Right.
If
Right.
I'm speaking correctly.
Well, you know, everyone's, you know, depending on circumstances, people, you know, different people are in different spaces and places, and I'm just, you know,
Yes, they are.
right. And so I just want to be mindful that, you know, we're not all at the same place at the same time, and a lot of building collectives is building bridges and moving forward. There's a process, or a lot of different processes that define.
Let me say this. Because I express myself, I think I'm a well-surrounded person, and I have been so blessed. I truly have been blessed through the whole ordeal. But I speak for other people. I work with people all the time, and to listen to people say they're feeling. If you're still gonna go back, you trust God and you give it to Him. That's why you're supposed to build and move forward. because what happened back there, well, it's a different generation from back there. I don't remember, but I have said that I had fortunate, been educated with good surrounding people around me and was taught. And that's why I said build. A lot of time what happened back there, those years, people didn't know. And right now we goes through life right now, 2021, we have people that don't know no better. So that's why we have to go forward. That's what I believe in, going forward. A lot of us haven't been in poverty. I know I haven't, but that don't make me better than you or the next person. My father always taught me that. Just because we was privileged of, that don't mean I'm better than the next person. But I have had a fortunate life. I can't sit here and lie and say, oh, I was poverty, I can go in the store, I have to do all this, but I do have feelings.
Okay.
And that's what makes me have consider other people. That don't mean I don't believe in God and this, I do. But sometimes you can't always sit there and think about what happened 5 years ago. You learn from, you fall, you get up and you start walking.
Okay.
And you fight for what you believe in. And don't let people determine that because you was there, I do. Because a lot of times I don't know what you're talking about. That's a word I'm just using general. Because if I say that, that I came up poverty, because all colors people, some of color, haven't always had to struggle. Fortunate. But that don't make me better.
Got you. Well, I think we covered the beloved community in full context tonight. Sarah, well, did anybody else have any very short comments before we start to kind of roll this up for this evening? And I'll be working with Bob on creating a tool so that we can actually get people's thoughts to generate what they call a word cloud, so that we can actually see and capture the sessions moving forward, starting the next one. But are there any short comments, positive short comments? We want to leave on a very positive note that we can ask people to share. Yes.
I think that can we put some more scripture into this?
Well, Joetta's going first, and then I think Sharon is next, and then Lois.
I think that it was very appropriate for us to hear what Victoria had to say this evening. And I have listened to everyone's comments, especially the one about from the beginning, to set the tone for this season. And being incorporating mindfulness in the practice of Ramadan. Not that we don't practice mindfulness in our own everyday activities.
Did you freeze up, Joetta?
Looks like it, yeah.
Okay, we can come back. Who was next? Was it Sandra or?
Yeah, that was Sandra over here.
Okay.
It was a great discussion, but we need to remember also that feelings are real and we should never deny our feelings. We should be able to speak our feelings, but we should not be locked into our feelings. And I think it would be good to hear from more people when we have the discussions. So maybe the small groups or some way we can break up, or we find a way that everyone will have, because I'd like to learn from some of the other people around in the group as well.
Great.
Thank you.
And then Sharon?
Okay, I'm just a little interested in putting a little more scripture spin on this when we start some of our next sessions, if possible. Like God talks about in the garden, I will give you this meat or fruit as sustenance, and just leaning on scripture to explain mindful eating and explain discussion and how we go into discussion. Let me not use fearful, but we go into discussion with an open mind.
Okay. Would you like to share with the group for just a brief overview next time, like 3 scriptures? Would that be okay?
Sure.
All right, great. Let's put that on a list. All right, Flora?
There will always be a time when there are subjects that we may not like, we may not like to expound on, but we should be able to speak openly. Maybe if we get into like a study group together, we can discuss everything and then come back into the fold and talk about what we have discussed. And try not to get upset about different things, because racism is ongoing. This is 2021 and we still got prejudice and racism going on. So we shouldn't get mad with each other, but just talk about it and expound on it.
Okay. And who was next? Lois, are you ready?
I'm ready. Yes, I just wanted to say that I read the article twice. And at the end of the article, I felt that that was something that I needed to do, that there was just some information there that says, now, what are you going to do? Because it came into every day. It talked about today's problems with sugar. And so what are you going to do? Just very quickly, Alex, I've been working with my family on their ancestors, on our ancestors, and going back to the old ways of eating. And so what's happening with this article and the discussion is it's helpful to teach people today, particularly if there's a generational gap, about the differences in the traditional ways in which we used to eat and how we want to bring them into more mindful eating. I don't think that we can leave out going back in order to move forward when we want to make that kind of behavior change. So I thought it was incredibly helpful to be able to include the sugar as part of my teaching moment.
Thank you, Lois.
I'm just grateful for the conversation. I've been waiting to hear about the history and the background. So that's just made me have a drop back as to, you know, the conversations as we move forward.
Right.
So I really thank you for bringing that forward.
Yeah, likewise.
And Father David, did you have something? Yes.
Well, I think the reality is that sugar is a part of our life. It's not as much an option for most people as it is a reality. So the more you have a familiarity with it, I think the better it is. I'm a little bit concerned about the artificial alternatives with all many of the artificial sweeteners. That if we're saying, well, sugar isn't good for you, is the alternative even worse? So I think it's easy with everything else. Too much of anything can be a bad thing. I think it's good to know the history that sugar originated in India, and from there it spread all the way around the world. Sometimes in means that were good, sometimes in means maybe that were not so good. But it's a conversation we have to have. And so I think this was an important and relevant topic to discuss.
Thank you.
I think Curtis wanted to say something.
Thank you. I think really with this conversation and starting off talking about Ramadan and also with sugar and how capitalism has shaped how we do and don't have access to healthy foods, something that's really like kind of settled on me is I think sometimes when conversations around mindful eating happen, it's really easy to forget how certain communities don't have access to foods that allow them to eat in a mindful way. So like, for example, the community that I live in, the grocery store that was in walking distance closed about 2.5 years ago. And so everything that is in walking distance to my home is 4 liquor stores and 3 Coney Islands. Folks that aren't familiar with Coney Islands, like fried fast foods and things like that. And so, and thinking about like being mindful during Ramadan and thinking about those that have starved, how can we also like be mindful about how we're having this conversation in context of creating access. So like my parents started a community garden in the same neighborhood and things like that, because I don't know, it's like, if you don't have access to something, it's really easy to feel shameful when a conversation like this happens and feeling like you need to do better, but not having those resources around you to be able to do that in a way that's real. And so, in thinking about like our beloved community, how can we have this conversation that is inclusive and also like shifting the spaces around us so we're not excluding people from being able to like make different choices, for lack of a better word.
Thank you.
Once again, I want to thank everyone. As Alex said, it's good to have a very vibrant conversation. I want to thank both Victoria and Troy, who might have, I don't see her now, for speaking up. That's not always easy to do in these kinds of settings. And it's really, I really appreciate it. And in obviously we're, as a group, we're doing this because we feel like going backwards is important to go forwards. But I also feel like I absolutely have more to learn about how to have these conversations in a better way. So I also appreciate the feedback to find ways of being more just increasing mindfulness, I suppose, so that these can increasingly be dialogical ways in which we can all be with each other during this shared historical trauma in order to create a different reality, in order to create a different social ecological, to create that beloved community. And it is indeed sometimes, so if there is anyone who has been harmed through this conversation, I want to quickly apologize for that. And I am absolutely available for anyone to have further conversations. If you felt you haven't been heard, or if you felt like you want to talk more with me or anyone else on the team, whichever, then I want to make sure you have the space to do so. And I'm really glad that so many of you that have felt it helpful in the overarching work that we are doing together. So in our next class, we're continuing to move into systemic change. We're going to increasingly move into action steps as we continue forward together and continue looking at food access and ways of shifting the system now.
And we also have an email address. Bob, you can put that in the chat. You could always email us questions as they pop up. Since it's, every other week, you might, just want to say, hey, I want to, I have this question, I have this statement, so that we don't have to wait until 2 weeks from now. So that's
I could just add to, we're deeply committed to the systems change and working with you all to create better systems, anti-racist food systems, everything that is going to help heal the wounds that we talked about. We're committed to doing what we can throughout this program. So we do want to hear from you, and we look forward to, the future sessions where we can really dig into the current food system and the system that we do want to create. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts tonight. I think it was helpful in, just setting the groundwork for what we need to do for healing moving forward.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Peace be upon you.
Likewise.
And be mindful.
Yeah, likewise.
All right. Thanks so much. See you in 2 weeks. Looking forward to it. Bye-bye for now.
Bye,
Thank
folks.
you, Alex. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Kelly.